Welcome, everybody. Welcome to episode number 149 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Elon, CEO of Greek University. We call these episodes Fraternity Foodie because there is nothing like great food to bring people together. Now, go and check out the new book that we released a month ago. It's called From Letters to Leaders, Creating Impact on Your College Campus and Beyond. You see, we actually read. Go pick that up on Kindle. And today we have an amazing guest for you. We have with us Dan Faill. He was born and raised in Wilmington, North Carolina, where he attended the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. There he became a founding father of Theta Chi Fraternity. After college, he traveled for Theta Chi as a consultant and ended up attending grad school at the University of the Pacific in California. He also worked at Loyola Marymount in LA, then served as director of fraternity and sorority life at Elon University. Dan moved back to the sun and shore of LA to work for the UCLA Alumni Association before following his passions of becoming a full-time speaker. Now, let me tell you about Dan. Imagine Brene Brown and George Carlin had a child. This is his style and his approach on stage. I'm here for it right now. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks so much, Mike. I had forgotten about the Brene Brown, George Carlin thing, but I'll own it. I'll own it. Curse words and all. It's great.
I think it's great. I think it actually perfectly describes you. So I love it.
What's funny is that people have often said like, hey, you kind of look like a young Brendan Fraser, like Mummy from the Mummy. And I was like, I'm not mad about that correlation. And then they're like, well, but you sound like Dane Cook, the comedian. And I was like, I don't think that's offensive, so I'll take it all.
There you go. It's always good to make those comparisons. I think you're in good company in all of those comparisons. I think it's good. Exactly. So, all right. So let's tell our audience a little bit about you and where you came from. You were born and raised in Wilmington, North Carolina, and then you went right down the road for college at UNC Wilmington. You know, for me, when I was a kid, I wanted to get away from home. I'm like, I gotta see you later, man. I'm out with the parents. I'm like, I'm done. I'm traveling across the state. So why the choice to stay local?
So, okay, yes, a choice to stay local, but not. Okay, so I'm a product of divorced parents. Uh-huh. And so in the midst of growing up, right, like grew up for like, 11, 12-ish years in Wilmington. And then parents had split long before that, but then moved. So like, dad moved to one part of the state. My mom moved to like 4 hours away. So Wilmington was always the like home in the back of my mind. Mm-hmm. The other part is, my mom went to UNCW. My dad went to UNCW. My cousin was admitted to UNCW at the same time that I was. My grandfather worked in the physical plant and was one of the people who went to Wilmington College before it came UNCW. And then actually, fun fact, he and I graduated together with my cousin, all with the same degrees, and we graduated at the same time. So we actually had classes together. But Wilmington for me was like, it's that family legacy, and I loved going to basketball games. I've still got the old, like 3 mascot versions ago of like memorabilia. And so that was just a family piece for me, and I loved it. And it's literally a couple miles from the beach, so you just can't beat it.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I didn't know about all that family piece, so that it makes a lot more sense to me. My parents also got divorced as well, and they were kind of going through some really rocky times as I was leaving, and then they got divorced while I was in college. But home was like, they were yelling at each other nonstop. I couldn't wait to get out of the house. I'm like, when am I leaving for college? I mean, can that happen right now? Because I can't deal with all this chaos.
And the saving grace of being in Wilmington, with my grandparents actually still live there. So my grandfather is still alive and still is there. And so every now and then I would be like, I would like a nice food. Like I would like non-dining hall food. Can I come do laundry and hang out and just like turn off, but be around like loving grandparents? Like I would like that, please. And so every now and then that's what we would do. And I understand, because I remember even working on a college campus for so long, a lot of those students end up coming and, they maybe drink too much. And rather than saying like, you're not supposed to drink, it's like, hey, what's going on? And then come to find out, they're like, I came to college and now my parents are getting divorced and everything feels like a lie. And so they're processing a lot. And so that's just one of those where I often bring and share a lot of those vulnerable stories too, of just divorces happen. And so being able to talk and understand with other people to discuss it is, I think, valuable, because 50% of the people in the United States are divorced.
Yep.
So half of all marriages end in divorce, which makes me question the whole, like, if it's not solving a fiefdom or like combining like, just empires, then I don't know why we're still doing the whole marriage thing. But speaking as a divorced person as well.
You've got a lot of experience to draw on in these conversations.
Hold up.
So, all right. So you're also another great founding father. It just seems like so many of the guests that I interview just so happen to be founding fathers. So that's a hint to those considering Greek life and listening right now, because this is going to be an amazing experience for you if you do decide to go through with it. You decided to join Theta Chi Fraternity as a founding father. What made this experience the one that you wanted over joining another existing organization on campus?
Mike, fun fact. I pledged a different organization the fall of my freshman year during formal recruitment. Okay, so like I was 17 years old coming to college, and so of course, like, I wanted to meet more people, women, and I wanted to like be more social, have alcohol, and so for me, like, it was like, well, where do you go, fraternity? And so I joined the one with the most social capital. Like, that's the one that I wanted because they seemed popular and everything. And I got a bid from that group. And I remember, oh my gosh, I vividly remember the very first like new member meeting for everyone. And they brought out all their intramural trophies and they were like, we're the best on campus. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was just the intramurals. And then they brought out like the bigger trophies for campus recognition and all that. And first meeting, they said, all right, introduce your name, where you're from, and what position and sport you played in high school. So we go around to everyone. There's like 18 of us or whatever. We go around to everyone. I'm next to last to go, just happened to be where I was sitting. And I'm like, my name's Dan, from Wilmington, but lived in Mocksville for a couple years for high school. I didn't play sports. I was in theater, so I acted like I can act like I can play sports. That joke fell flat because everyone else was an athlete. It didn't feel like a good fit, right? Like, and what I was sold in terms of like leadership and and I'm the cocky 17-year-old. When can I be president? And it's like, what's reserved for seniors? I was like, that seems egotistical. And so it just didn't feel like a good fit. So I talked to the president, and he was super understanding. My RA, who lived right next door to me, was a member of that organization. He understood and was like, I get that it's not a good fit, no harm, no foul. Like, you're not initiated, so like, it's no big deal. My roommate was like, hey man, and I knew him from high school. He was like, hey man, like, I'm pledging a fraternity. And I was like, no, what fraternity in the world would take you? He was super awkward, amazing person, but like super awkward. And then come to find out, two of the other guys I went to high school with were also starting this. And so there was the core group of 8 that started a year prior, and then they were growing. And so we were part of that growth spurt for them. And like 8 guys on the floor, just my floor, ended up joining Theta Chi as founding fathers. And so that was one where you look around the room and there was no cookie cutter. There was no like stereotype. I mean, I think we ran the gamut. We were literally the bad news bears when it came to like, number 1, sports ability, but number 2, like we didn't fit a mold. And I liked that. And what's funny is that because I had pledged the one that had a lot of social capital, there was a lot of hesitation about giving me a bid to be a founding father, because they were like, well, if that's what you want, this is not that experience. And I was like, but I depledged, right? Like I decided to not go through with that. And I think I want this. And I loved it so much that, like you said, I traveled for my organization as a consultant. And so there's a lot of work that goes into being a founding member, founding brother, founding sister of an organization, but it's worthwhile. It really is.
I totally agree. It pays dividends over a lifetime. There's no question. When you build something like that from the ground up, that's an experience that you'll be able to draw from. And so I completely agree. And it sounds like we joined the same chapter, because I certainly was part of the bad news bears. There's no question about that. And everybody was so different. And I even actually recruited somebody from my high school as well into the fraternity, and we couldn't be more different. And so I think that's what I appreciated about the organization, is that I was going to meet people that ordinarily I probably wouldn't be around. They're just very different than I am. And I learned a lot. And I think that was the best part of it.
Mm-hmm. So, fully agree.
Yeah, that's really good. Now tell us, what was it like working for Theta Chi headquarters as a consultant?
You know, it was the most fun that I never want to have again. I will put it that way. So fraternity consultants, you know, I mean, in essence, we live out of our cars. We sleep on fraternity couches. And as a 6'2" guy, there's not many big couches that you fit comfortably on. So we drove everywhere. So, you know, I was at a different chapter every 3.5 days, but I got to see an incredible amount of the country. My region was the West region. So if you drew a line from the middle of Texas all the way to like Minneapolis, and like, so it's a curved line, every or chapter west of that is are the ones that I had.
Yeah.
So I got to see a lot of this country and meet a lot of incredible people. You know, and I think that gave me a bigger value and a bigger sense of appreciation for everyone who is West Coast based. When it's like, well, West Coast is different. It's like, no, you're not. We're all brothers, right? But having lived out here now for, you know, well over a decade, I'm like, no, the West Coast really is a little bit different, and we are so far removed from almost every other headquarters. Mm-hmm. And so it is a different feel and sense of brotherhood, sisterhood out here. But yeah, I mean, I love the experience. I was trained under Dave Westall, who was, you know, a long-serving executive director at Theta Chi, and he and I still remain friends to this day, and he still calls me out on some of my idiotic statements and things that I did as a 21-year-old consultant.
Yes. Well, listen, both of us seem to be cut from the same cloth, because I certainly learned just about everything I know from Dave Westall. So, you know, it's interesting how those things turn out, but what a guy.
For real. I mean, like, him and his Diet Cokes all day, every day, right? Love him.
Cut back on those Diet Cokes, Dave.
I think he's at Coke Zero now. I think so.
Yeah, I think so too, but you've had enough. It's okay. So, all right. So tell us, you worked for Loyola Marymount in LA, and then you served as director of fraternity and sorority life at Elon University, starting in 2015. So, you know, tell us, what was that experience like for you?
What's funny is that, so when I started at LMU, I remember telling my supervisor at the time, or the woman who was going to be my supervisor when she offered me the position, I was like, look, I want to be here. I want to beat the average lifespan of a Greek advisor, which was at the time 2 to 2.5 years. And so I was like, I want to beat that. Like, I want to be here for at least 2 years, maybe 3, or until she or I feel like I'm no longer being productive with the community. That was my philosophy. After 8 years, I was like, okay, same position, right? Like, I'd gotten some cost of living increase or whatever, but same position, same everything. I knew that I needed supervisory experience if I wanted to move up, and, you know, and so it was just time. It was time, you know, 8 years. And so the position opened up at Elon. I was like, oh, like, it's back home. It's a director. I get the ability to like help shape a community that, for, you know, from the outside, it was like, this is a great campus, and the community sounds like they need some work and help, but, you know, like, that, it's a great professional move. Mm. Personally, I was going through a divorce at the time, so a lot of things just kind of came to head at the same time, and it was like, this seems like it's the right opportunity. And it was back home, and I've always wanted to move back to North Carolina. And so, you know, my stepmom's family was from, you know, not even 10 minutes away from the campus. And so there was a lot of homesickness, I think. And I went out there, and, you know, I went from a great community at LMU to a, you know, a community that needed work, but great students at Elon.
Mm-hmm. That's really nice. Yeah, I like that campus an awful lot. I remember many times going through Elon and just looking at the buildings and going, wow, this is really beautiful. This is a beautiful.
It is legitimately a best kept secret in terms of how absolutely stunning the campus is.
I was blown away. It really exceeded my expectations when I got there. And so definitely you were very fortunate to be there. Let's talk about some of your programs. I mean, you talk about the intersections of blackouts and sex. So hit us up with some of these statistics that affect collegians around blackouts, sexual assault, and consent.
Well, I mean, you can Google anything that's current. I mean, there's a lot of statistics that have happened over the course of the time of it being studied. But what we do know, so like the WHO just released a report that 1 in 3 women will experience sexual violence in their life in the world. Now, granted, in the United States, you know, there's the red zone that happens on college campuses, that first 6 weeks of school, 6 to 8 weeks of school, which tends to be a little bit more risky behavior, risky drinking, kind of a socializing, as it were. We also know that 90% of people who kind of interact in a situation that know each other in terms of sexual violence. And so, like, the perpetrator is known to the victim in a lot of senses. Alcohol is involved in almost 50% of every interaction, alcohol or other drugs. And, and I think one of the scary statistics, and this statistic is almost 10 years old now, is that, so for example, from the time that we started with hello to the time that we say goodbye, every 2 minutes, there will have been a report of sexual violence in the United States. That would be roughly 15 if this is a 30-minute podcast, right? And that in and of itself is frightening to know, but then being able to know that we've got the ability to shift that behavior. And the approach that I specifically take is that it's not it's not the fault of one gender, right? Like it's not men's fault, even though men are statistically significantly higher perpetrators of sexual violence. However, the approach that I take is, let's talk about the environment that is created that allows for some of this to happen. And I share very vulnerable stories. I myself was, I was blacked out drunk and was sexually assaulted. And so I share that as part of my keynote, because I think I'm of the opinion that the more that we share about ourselves, the more that we bond as people, the more the foundations of relationships can be built. And so through that vulnerability, we actually find a lot of strength. I mean, that's the whole Brene Brown piece of like, what armor do you put on and what do you take off? Do you let people see? And when it happened, I had no clue. Like, I didn't know how to talk to my fraternity brothers. I didn't know how to talk to my friends that were women. Like, I didn't know what to do. My biggest concern was they were going to try to give me a high five because I had sex and was blacked out. And I just didn't even know. She filled me in. The woman who I had sex with, like, she's the one who filled me in, and she was like, oh my gosh, and I was like, oh my God, what happened? And she was like, well, you happened. It's like, no, we didn't do anything. And I internalized a lot of that and didn't realize that's what there was consent education, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is now. And it wasn't mandated like it is now for college students. So it's a lot. The statistics are all out there, and I'm of the opinion that if we can share more of our stories and if we can help people create safer environments, then, maybe at least we can support survivors in a better sense.
Yeah, thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for talking about it. I think we need more men talking about this issue. And so I'm grateful to have you out there doing this good work. I think it's more important than ever, especially as we start heading into this fall 2021 semester where students have really had no in-person events to speak of. And now we're all coming back to campus looking for the big party and tons of alcohol, right?
Well, and we're already seeing that even with some of the virtual engagements I've done in the spring, even during April for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, like the numbers are already starting. Like alcohol transports are starting to increase more so than they were a year ago this time, even like before campuses shut down. And so like we're seeing a lot of this increase. So, I'm worried. I'll be honest, I'm very worried about the fall because like you said, we've almost had 2 classes of students who have never stepped foot on a college campus.
Right. 100%. I agree with you. I was talking to Hank Newer about that from a hazing prevention standpoint, that we haven't had this conversation for 2 years now, essentially. So, that's a warning, I think, to everybody who's listening here, that we really, really have to get everything in order, start talking about education and prevention on all of these issues as we start approaching the fall. I agree with you. Completely. Now, the other thing is, I've made so many mistakes over my career, I can barely count it. And I believe that I'm going to succeed because of those mistakes that I've made. And so somehow we need to normalize making mistakes, especially when you're a college student trying to find what your leadership style is. So let's talk about it. What are some of the tips from your program that's called Faill Forward, which I love?
So there's a lot of different tips and tricks. I think the first one is, how do you create a safe environment for your members? And when I say safe, I mean, well, obviously risk management, everything aside, when I'm talking more about how do you encourage your directors, your committee chairs, how do you encourage them to think outside the box so that you're not doing everything just because that's the way it's always been done. So we've had 2 years off where there's not been a philanthropy in person. So why do we have to come back and do the sports related philanthropy that we say is open to all of campus, but it's not really open to all of campus? And so because we really just, as a fraternity, are inviting the sororities, and the sororities inviting fraternities, but we say that we're inviting all the fraternities and sororities, but we're really leaving out all the culturally based fraternities and sororities because it's teams of 10 and maybe they don't have membership of 10. So there's all of that. So I think we've got an opportunity to try new things this coming year. So why not try? If you try and it fails, then great, you've learned a great lesson. But that doesn't mean that you have to revert to what's comfortable. I think the other piece is, how do you take time? Being a leader is hard, and we don't talk about how much leadership sucks. And so being, and I was elected at the end of my sophomore year, I was elected my chapter president, and I thought I knew it all because I was a know-it-all 19-year-old. I made so many mistakes. I had 3 different vice presidents, and I thought that was their fault. Let's look at a leader as opposed to them, right? And so I think if we can allow these opportunities for, number one, for leaders to take time. I would blow off steam in a negative coping mechanism, which was via social, alcohol. And it was like, well, I'm not president right now. And it's like, no, you are, and you acting a fool. And I think being able to find those productive coping mechanisms, maybe it's the gym. I'm not much of a gym guy. Maybe it's running. I'm definitely not a running guy. So what are they? And for me, I like media. So, going to the movies, hanging out with people, but finding ways that alcohol's not the crutch to hang out with people. And so finding that time and taking time to, put yourself in time out. I think that's a big one. Also knowing that you can do anything, but you can't do everything.
Right.
So knowing that you've got a lot of options and opportunities, but you cannot do them all. That's how burnout happens. And so I don't know if you've had Kate Steiner on to talk about burnout as a student leader, but she would be phenomenal to use in that capacity. But we sometimes as leaders hit that brick wall hard, and then we're no good to anyone, especially ourselves. It's like a credit card, right? So like once you hit a limit, it's not like they are like, oh, let's just raise your limit and give you a lot more money to spend that you don't have. Like, no, they cut you off. And then your bank is like, oh, you don't have any more money, so we're going to bill you for that. That's, it's important. The other analogy, like you recharge your phone every night. How do you recharge yourself as a leader or as a human? Do you make time? Do you get 6-ish to 8-ish hours of sleep? And I say 6-ish because sometimes I just begged students to please get some sleep. And those are just some of those permissions I think that we need to give leaders, that you don't have to have it all together and you don't have to be perfect. And that's the James Robillata philosophy, that the best leaders to learn from are those that are imperfect.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything that you said. And I think the trap that a lot of fraternity and sorority leaders fall into is that they feel like they need to do everything, because if they delegate it to somebody else, then they're going to screw it up and they're not going to do a good job. So I need to do everything to make sure that everything's done the right way for my fraternity. But meanwhile, you're not learning any lessons in this process. You're not going to be able to build a $25 million company by yourself. So let's learn how to delegate while we're in college and how to motivate those who are lazy in our chapter. Let's learn all of these skills so that way when we go out in our career, we can build that $25 million company.
And a lot of that also comes back to, so there's a fable, an analogy or whatever that I would use, of like a butterfly or a butterfly, a caterpillar and a chrysalis. And so, there's this thing of like a little girl is waiting for the caterpillar to come out of the chrysalis, and she sees some wiggling and trying to get out. And she grabs scissors to try to help one get out. And so she snips just the bottom of it, just so the caterpillar, the butterfly now can come out. Well, it falls to the ground. Like it falls straight to the bottom of the little cage for it. And she's like, well, what's wrong? What's wrong? Come to find out, the way that the butterfly, number one, gets color in its wings, but figures out how to fly is because as it's breaking out of the chrysalis, it's flexing those muscles and getting used to it. So whereas the little girl thought she was empowering the butterfly of like, here, let me do this a little bit for you so it's not as hard. The butterfly then couldn't, and it took a long time for it to figure out how to flex its wings and actually fly eventually, but it could have just come out flying immediately. And so how do we do that with even our committee chairs and leaders? The shortcut isn't always the right way. Right. And so knowing that some of our people need, they might want to take shortcuts, but we've got to actually just do it right. As leaders, we need to let people, give them deadlines, check in on them, but know that it's not going to be done the exact way that we want it. And that's okay.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And leadership does take time to ripen. I feel like all too often we throw people into these positions. You were president as a sophomore. I just wonder how different it would have been if you were president as a senior, knowing some lessons along the way. And, it's not to say that you can't go from a new member to president. I have seen that happen, and I've seen it done successfully. I would say that's probably more the exception than the rule. But I think that's something that we need to keep in mind, is that we need to give people
I would say that, like, but the sophomore, the newer presidents, the younger presidents could be successful if they were also then supported by the juniors and seniors.
Yes.
Right. And so I'm not saying that was my fault by any means. I think I didn't do a great job engaging those junior seniors. But at the same time, I think a lot of it is like, well, why are we doing it that way? That's way stupid, is what you hear from those who sit at the back of the meeting, who are really just there so they don't get fined. Right. And so how do you make sure everyone's involved and engaged? I remember when I ran against a guy for president, his entire speech was, if you're not going to support me, I don't want the effing job. And that was his whole speech. And I went in with like, we need help with scholarship and we need to do a little bit more service and leadership. I mean, it was like a whole speech. And his was like, if you're not going to be with me, I don't want the job.
Right.
I understand that statement now. So much more.
Yeah, that's so interesting. The other thing is we should talk about that you talk about is imposter syndrome. Now, this is something that creeps into the heads of all the people out there that are leaders, all the speakers, me, everybody gets it at some point. So what is imposter syndrome, and what should we do when we feel that starting to set in?
So, 70% of people in the world will feel imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. Imposter syndrome, when you think about it, is a feeling of isolation. It's a feeling that, well, how did I get here and why on earth am I in this role? I don't deserve this role. I'm sure there are many other people who should be doing this role. And all of a sudden it starts to feed in on itself. Now, imposter syndrome in the workforce and the organization force, when it creeps in, like, it can cause depression, it can cause anxiety, it can cause a lack of motivation. There's so many negative aspects of it. And so when we feel that way of like, I have no clue what I'm doing right now, we don't share that feeling. Mm-hmm. I'm of the opinion, again, the more vulnerable we are, the more that we share, that we actually have a lot more in common than we think we do. One of the things that it existed at LMU prior to my arrival, and I made sure to continue it, and it was very nice, was kind of like we called it gavel club, but it was a president's roundtable. Mm-hmm. And in those moments, and I would structure them a little bit, differently every single week, but some of them it would be like, hey, we're just going to talk about risk management. What's some of the things that you're worried about? And so literally just as a president, what are you worried about? And then I would do another one where I would bring in the social chairs and risk manager and be like, what are you worried about? And as soon as someone opens up of like, I'm really worried that people are going to pregame too hard this weekend. Okay, great. Let's talk about like, anybody else feel that way? Oh my gosh. And the hands go up. As soon as you realize you're not alone, the world opens up and you feel more connected to share ideas, to bounce ideas off. Or if it's like, hey, we do a mandatory like check-in and pizza party before, so you have to check in an hour and a half before getting on the buses to go to the event, but that's also to get food in your system and to like monitor in case someone did pregame a little too hard. And so that then became almost common practice with most of the chapters at LMU at the time. And that sort of sharing creates the community that values working, that values the actual like interfraternalism that's often said, but very rarely executed.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's a great way to get people to be more vulnerable and actually move the needle, start getting some progress, because I think now we feel like, all right, we're all in this thing together. We all have the same concerns. We all know that homecoming is coming up or whatever, some big event is coming up, and let's just own it and figure out a path forward. That's all,
Yeah.
Think about this.
And maybe, maybe one president's like, I'm worried about this, and it's crickets. It's like, well, I'm not going to share that again. But that's where I think we as staff or advisors or volunteers or whomever can chime in and be like, well, that's a valid thing. Do we have any ideas, right? And open it up of, okay, so maybe this isn't anyone's, but usually someone else has that problem. And as good Greek advisors, when those are problems, and it's like, all right, well, I know that there's 2 other chapters that have it, but they're not saying anything right now. Start to open that up and have those conversations. And that comes back to, like the whole tagline that I have is, how do you create conversations that matter? Because we can talk about Greek Week, but is that really important? We can talk about t-shirts. Is that really important? We can talk about the structure of, sorority formal recruitment, which has not really changed in however many years. Is that really important? No. What are we creating, and how are we having the conversations in those spaces to embody the value of brotherhood, sisterhood via interfraternalism?
Amen. And those Rush t-shirts, it's not important. I'm telling you right now, it's not important. And please don't take time out of your chapter meeting to discuss it. That can be done on a committee level. Please, please,
Yeah,
please,
exactly.
for the sake of God.
I remember, can I just real quick, I remember one time, and I still get this text from a chapter brother of mine. So it was formal glassware. And I was social chair at the time. As a senior, I was social chair at the time. And I was just over the pettiness of like, well, I want this and I want a decanter. And people were like, who the hell are you wanting a decanter at 20 years old? Right? Like all this back. So I listed 3 options. I was like, option 1, it's, like 2 wine glasses and, an aerator. Obviously, I'm not a wine drinker. Option 2 was like a stein and something else. And then option 3 was go yourself. And so like literally that I printed it out on a sheet of paper for every single member. I was like, circle what you want, pass it back in, and the majority is going to rule. And because I had a lot of smart ass brothers, they circled option 3.
Of course.
They were like, to me, like, fuck yourself, Dan. But I'm like, or just let me pick.
Right.
So I think sometimes we just have to have the, empower the people to make the decision, because that's why you elect them in the role.
Right. I love it. That's really good. Now, listen, this has been a very difficult year, I think, for fraternity and sorority life. I was talking to Hank Newer yesterday. I mean, we're talking 3 deaths so far, just in the spring. We're thinking about Bowling Green and VCU. How can chapters break free of these stories, the negative stereotypes in Greek life, because there is a lot of positive work that is going on within fraternity and sorority life that doesn't get discussed in the newspapers. So how can they stay motivated to leave a positive legacy instead?
Yeah. Well, it's easy. Stop doing the negative shit. Stop doing all the other stuff, right? Like, it doesn't matter how many service hours you do if you killed someone. It doesn't matter how much money you raise if you put someone in the hospital. And so I think we as fraternities, sororities, communities, we as a whole need to stop saying, well, look at all the good stuff. And why is no one caring about the good stuff? They care about the good stuff. But when it's overshadowed every Thursday, Friday, Saturday day that ends in Y with acting a fool because like, well, it's it's just social and it's this, or like, what else is there to do because there's nothing else. That's not an excuse. And so, right, like excuses are tools of the incompetent. People who dwell upon them are seldom good for anything more. So how do we just get rid of the excuse of, well, this is just us blowing off steam? Great. There are other ways to blow off steam. Why do you have to pregame for a philanthropy at 8 a.m.? And again, I'm guilty of it. As a college student, I was 100% guilty of it because that was the crutch that we used.
Right.
There's so many better ways to interact. And so I think when people are like, well, the administration's out to get us. Ain't nobody out to get you. Ain't nobody out to get you. You get you in trouble. The administration just has to hold you accountable to the values that you say that you have. The newspaper's not out to get you. The news in general in the world loves it when someone is like, here's what I stand for. I'm not standing for it right now. Like, I'm not behaving that way. The values congruence piece. Who do you say and who you are? That's going to speak more volumes. And so as communities, if we strive to do the best that we can to create a safe environment, I'm not saying don't party. I'm saying create the safe environment so that you've checked every single risk management box to make sure that all of your attendees feel safe. They feel like that's the place. I think fraternities and sororities should be the safest place on a college campus. I think a fraternity house should be the #1 safest place where women, men, however you identify in terms of gender, identity, and sexuality, I think you should be able to be yourself in a fraternity or sorority house. We know that that's not the case. So how do we create that space? Maybe it's doing more safe zone training. Maybe it's, again, coming back to the events that you say they're open to all of campus, but you're only promoting it to just a few. Mm. How do you structure your events to be more inclusive? Are you even having inclusivity conversations in your chapter? Look at your recruitment practices. Are you looking at men that are like, have a good chill to pull ratio? Okay, stop using that as a metric. If you're looking at the sorority formal recruitment, like if you have to make a legacy go to round 1 or round 2 as an automatic, maybe that's just a rethink, because a legacy from one school and one chapter looks very different from another chapter. Mm-hmm. We have to have these discussions. And quite frankly, this coming year, fall 2021, spring 2022, this is the year to get rid of everything that we have done that's not good. It's not productive. And now we can build from the ground up. Now we can actually start and say, you know what? Our new member program was garbage. let's do some different things. And hopefully when people hear me say this, that doesn't mean add bad crap to it. It really means get rid of the bad crap. Like, why are you doing a scavenger hunt? Why are you doing the, interview? All the new members have to interview the members with their little notebook that they have to carry around. That serves zero purpose, BT dubs, right? Like, get rid of all this stuff that's not productive and rethink it all. Now's the chance to do that.
Amen. I think the pandemic gave us that opportunity to do the reset on fraternity and sorority life. And I'm hoping that the fraternity and sorority chapters over the last 12 months, that they've seen the results of that they've seen that they can go out and recruit men and women that share their values without worrying about what kind of shoes they're wearing in the sorority, or what kind of haircut this guy has. None of that's important. At the end of the day, the question is, do they share the values of the organization, and are they going to help you move this organization forward? That's it.
Yes. However, a 17, 18-year-old doesn't understand the values of an organization. Like, if you were to tell me, joining Theta Chi Fraternity, really, I was 18 at the time, right? And it's because my birthday was in October. So like, I think mid-October is when I ended up joining. Truth, temperance, and tolerance. Truth, got it, understand that, be honest, cool. Temperance, no clue. Tolerance, I'm going to work on that on Thursday, right? Like, that's in my brain what it meant. Right. So we're not having those discussions. And so maybe it's can you do a new member activity where you rewrite your creed using today's language? Right? Like, that's an easy one. And so, like, how do we define truth, temperance, and tolerance in today's words, rather than 150 years ago when it was really only white men at a campus? And so how do we use today's language and talk about it in that way? I think, again, there's a lot of opportunities, but we're just not thinking that way because it's not the way it's been done.
There's so much opportunities, and that's kind of where I'm going with it, is that, if we can look at our recruitment events and say, okay, instead of doing the big social events, we couldn't do that during the pandemic. Instead, let's do something on Zoom where we're going to talk about the values of the organization and how the members try to live that out on a daily or a weekly basis. And, what does truth mean to you? So these types of conversations, I'm hoping that we'll start to reframe that a little bit less dependent on the big social events and more on the relationships, right? And that's the hope. And we'll see if that continues this fall. I hope it does.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. So this has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed this. Now, obviously, we call ourselves Fraternity Foodie, and we do love good food here. And so you happen to be living in a place that is, an abundance of good food in LA. So I need to know, next time I'm in LA, what is the place to go? Where should I go to get great food? What's your favorite restaurant?
Like, Mike, you can't say again, like you already said, this is LA. Like, I need a best Mexican food trucks. The Kogi food truck, you got to hit that up. I'm spoiled right now. So in the midst of a pandemic, literally across the street, 200 feet from me, Home State Tacos just opened up, and it's a place that's from Austin, Texas, right? Like, they from Austin, Texas, opened up several locations out here in LA because Austin does amazing breakfast tacos.
Oh, yes.
In LA, they say they do breakfast tacos. It's not Texas breakfast tacos. And so while it's not traditional LA food, the fact that it's across the street and they are amazing. In fact, I've got one in the fridge for me to heat up later this morning. I will be having that. Right. So food trucks, you can't go wrong, because LA really helped create the scene of food trucks. And so there's so many different types. I mean, seafood wise, when I was married, my ex-wife and I, we would go to a place called Oshun, Oshun, Ocean, but it was a sushi place. So like, super creative. But it was fresh caught day of. You could watch them slice it all up and roll it, for sushi right in front of you. And some of the freshest that you'd ever had. Oh my God, I wish it was still open. There's a lot, man. If you want an all vegan menu, one of my favorite places to go is in downtown, and it's called Modern Times. It's the Dankness Dojo, but it's a brewery, beanery, and restaurant. And so, I like craft beer. And so they've got all that. They also do all their own roasting of beans for coffee and cold brew and nitro brew. And then their menu is just decadently amazing. And it feels very LA to say, if you want an all vegan menu, but it's true.
You sound so LA today. I love it. I think
until I try to order sweet tea and they're like, here's your iced tea and the sugar's on the table. And I'm like, get that shit out. Like, no, that's not how you
come on, man. I mean, this is a guy who lives in Nashville, right? So I know barbecue and sweet tea like all day long. It's great.
Yep.
But can I get fresh seafood? No, I'm landlocked. There is no fresh seafood.
Baby Blues Barbecue is down in Venice. And that is, I would say, the closest traditional, and being from East Coast, North Carolina, for pulled pork, it's vinegar based. That's the closest I can get to the vinegar based pulled pork.
It's so delicious. Oh, I'm going to have that for lunch today.
I'm jealous.
All right. So listen, Dan, if our listeners, if they want to bring you in to speak on their campus, where's the best place for them to go to connect with you, to learn more about your programs?
Love it. Thank you, Mike. So again, I am Dan Faill on all social medias. So slide into the DMs on Instagram. That's Dan Faill, DANF as in Frank, AILL. So Faill is into flunk, but with another L on the end. I'm also at danfaill.com. So anyone can just reach out through, I've got a contact form on danfaill.com, or just slide into the Instagram DMs and we can have those conversations.
Dan does an incredible job. You will be very happy with his performance on stage. So I'm a huge fan, Dan, and looking forward to seeing you at some of these conferences coming up over the next year. Hopefully we'll run into each other on stages all across North America. I wish you nothing but success, and thank you so much for being a friend to Greek University, to all the speakers that we have. And what can I say, man? Let's get out there and let's get it.
Let's go. Let's have those conversations that matter, Mike. I appreciate it so much.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. Please share and like this, and we'll see you on another episode of Fraternity Foodie. Thanks so much. Bye for now.
Thanks, Mike.